We're currently in a series called Ins and Outs, where we're examining what we put into our lives, how it makes a significant impact on our personal direction and outcomes, and how we see the world. Last week, Nick talked about the spiritual side of that. In a couple weeks, he's going to talk to you about the physical side of what we put in and then what we get out. And I don't know how this happened, but I get to cover mental and emotional. And it didn't start to be funny to me until I looked at a draft of our sermon notes for this week, and at the very top it said, Joel Bowers, mental. Next week I'll be emotional, but it's just ideas for my new business card, I guess. Since the topic of the brain and emotions sync up so well, then I'm going to focus specifically on the brain this morning. I'm going to get a little geeky on you. Before I do that, I just want to say, whenever we talk about the brain, I don't hear a lot of conversations about the brain in church. I hear a lot of conversations about the mind, okay? And the difference between the brain and the mind is the brain is the physical place where that we can see. The mind, our ethics, our morals, our convictions, the way that those things interact, and lines start to blur in a way that we can't always read it. But with the advent of technology and medicine, we've been able to learn a lot about the brain and how we process information. And maybe it could shed a light on why we feel certain things. All right? So I'm not trying to tell you what to think. I'm just going to tell you how your brain works. All right? And let's be honest, if we didn't have our brain, none of these things we value would really matter all that much. Right? Is there a scarecrow photo? There is a scarecrow photo. Okay, so we've got to get an understanding of the brain first, okay? So I want you all to take your hand, okay? And everybody hold your hand up, all right? I'm not going to require you to remember what these things are called, just what they do, okay? And it'll be easy. Hold it out. Take a walnut, take the shell off, put it right here. This is your thalamus. This is where your sense of self comes from. This is who I am. All right? Take an almond. This is your amygdala. You're going to put it right here, like where your wrist and your hand come together. All right? Roll it up. Turn it at a 90 degree. When you see this image from now on, you're going to think of the brain. All right? Which we never do this with our hands anyway. It feels so awkward. Now, I've got a spinal column, which goes into a limbic system. All right? The limbic system makes decisions very, very quickly. In the amygdala is where fear, aggression, anger reside, right? But it gets all the power from the limbic system, all right? If you've ever seen pretty much every living mammal and a lot of reptiles have a limbic system. If you've ever seen a crocodile eat a cow, you've seen a limbic system work, all right? We, as human beings, have a lot more than that. Take 4 sheets of notebook paper, crumple them up. I thought about having all these things, the nuts and the paper underneath your seats, but I feared that our custodial staff would kill me in my sleep. You're just going to have to imagine. So, crumple them all up, wrap them around here. And this is your neocortex. This is where all the super fancy things that we attribute to human beings that no one else has is. All right, 30% of the neocortex is this front part right here. You can go ahead and put your hand down if you want to. That's fine. I'll just show you now. Okay, it's called the neocortex. This is right here. This part of the neocortex is the prefrontal cortex. This is where logic, reason, the ability to forecast the weather comes from, right here. If you're a farmer and you make a crop calendar every year, you know very well, because of experience, if you've been farming for, let's say, 2 years, you know that things might get in the way that interfere with plan A. If you've been farming for 3 years, you know that plan A rarely ever happens, right? So you plan contingencies. That is your prefrontal cortex at work. Again, there's not going to be a quiz at the end. You don't have to worry. It's all going to be all right. All right, back to it. Over here by my thumb on both sides, this is your anterior cingulate cortex. This is where we feel affection and love and romance and all those Cupid feelings and friendship and those feelings that we have about fuzzy, warm mammals like puppies. Aww. That is your anterior cingulate cortex kicking in right there. Look at that guy. Do we have one more? We have one more. Cotton ball. All right. Now, sort of above your ears is what we call the parietal lobe, where my thalamus, remember the walnut, is responsible for my sense of self. My parietal lobe makes me aware of my surroundings, of where I am. My parietal lobe right now is aware of all of you. It is aware of how high I am off the ground. It's aware that I'm in Pierre, South Dakota, the United States, North America, the world, the universe. All right? That is where our sense of being comes from. Where am I? What are my surroundings? How do I interact with them? And these are all parts of your brain. You're amazing. You're really cool.
Joel, do you have a slide of the Walking Dead in the target area?
I don't. No, Merlin, I don't. So these are things that all happen at once. We don't even think about. There's a pun in there somewhere. Now the brain gets even more interesting as we do brain scans. Okay, so you can inject dye into the brain and be given certain images to think about, be exposed to happiness or stress or anything like that, and we can discern what people think or people experience when they experience love, anger, friend and foe, romance, and most fascinating, God. Scientists have become more and more interesting in what people's brains are doing with spirituality, how we picture God, how we think God works in the world, and what happens when we worship or pray. And I have to say this. I went through about when I was 18 years old, I'm 32 now, so when I was about 18 years old, I decided I was going to go down this road where I had to be able to explain everything that had to do with my faith, right? Gave myself to that. And after about 7 years of doing that, I just felt exhausted, just worn out. And the realization that I came to is, however important it is for me to be able to articulate certain things about my faith, one thing that's just as important as certainty is mystery. And some of the best things that have happened in my life are things that I can't explain. So, I'm not telling you to be able to articulate everything in faith, but let's, in this conversation, look at what we know. So, we generally have two ways of viewing God that I think most of us are aware of. We have angry or vengeful, all right? Or we have a loving and merciful God. I think most of us in this room have one of those two views. The geography of that God, if I have a vengeful and an angry God, I view him as far away, really distant, or if he comes close, then it's generally to judge me. If he has a little bit of love in him, then I have to beg him to come and be here, all right? If I have a loving and a merciful God, then he's really close to me. He's concerned with the everyday parts of my life, and I don't have to beg him to come and be close because his love is all-encompassing and all-surrounding. So how does the brain interpret the way we see God? People who see God as vengeful or angry in a brain scan, their limbic system lights up. Anger, fear, aggression. And fear, actually, is neurologically and chemically more powerful than love. Interesting to me. Have you ever been afraid and then felt love without thinking about it just suddenly take over? Maybe not. Have you ever been angry and all of a sudden just felt love take over? Maybe not, really? No? Maybe you've made the decision that in the midst of your anger to step into a place of love. Now that has a tremendous effect on the outcome of the situation that you're in. You begin to think clearly, but for me, there's still a shaking in my hands, my heart is still beating fast, maybe my face is still flushed, maybe there's a ringing in my ears. Neurologically, fear is very powerful. And because of that, people who think of God as angry or vengeful have very powerful feelings about their God. It puts them in a state of stress and anxiety, and there's a sense of I have to be right in order to be okay. Now, subjects who saw God as primarily loving, their anterior cingulate cortex lit up, where I experienced love and relationship and safety. They experience affection, forgiveness for themselves and for others, and when they frequently practice this kind of worship, where they focus on this loving God who desires to be close to us, the thalamus, where I get my sense of self, actually becomes asymmetric on one side. It shows up on brain scans, clearly, every time. I'm telling you, this research for this message has blown my mind, because scientists from a Christian perspective and scientists from a secular perspective are saying the exact same thing, which is just like makes me a little giddy. It makes the geek inside of me very giddy. So my thalamus, my sense of self, becomes asymmetrical, becomes larger. And scientists think that means that this idea that God is love completely encompasses and consumes all that I am, because that's where my sense of self comes from. And these people who see God as a loving God operate more loving in the world. They operate with the assumption that people and other things are more loving too, and it's safe to be a person who loves others. And that's a pretty nice idea. One other thing, bonus, is you remember your parietal lobe here that talks about where you are. I mean, it registers where you are, my surroundings. When people often regularly pray to a loving God on brain scans, they see significant decreased function in the parietal lobe. Meaning what? That somehow in the brain, it seems that person praying to a loving God is transcending to a different place, which is weird. And oftentimes when people pray to a loving God or worship a loving God, they describe having to come back to this reality of where they are now. I know that that's happened to me before when I pray, giving neurological credence to the fact that there is something really, really special out there. Bring it around. For the majority of my life, I believed in a God whose love was, despite what I said out loud, very conditional. I experienced a great deal of stress. I was aggressive toward outsiders. I felt that the most important thing that I could do is convince people that my view of God was the right one. But then I started coming in contact with people. I started giving myself to church work and experiencing people who also see God as angry, as vengeful, as wrathful, as suspect standing up there waiting to rap their knuckles with a ruler. And I saw the stress and the fear and the anxiety and wondering if they would ever measure up. And I began to have love for these people and go, oh my gosh, something's not lining up here. And what helped me cut through that image with myself and with others was studying the life of Jesus. Matthew 11, 28, 30, Jesus offers this beautiful reassurance of who God is. And this is translated directly from the Greek with some cultural awarenesses as well, all right? So Matthew 11, 28 through 30. Are you weary? carrying a heavy burden, then come to me, and I will refresh your life as you rest with me. Accept only the task I give you as my disciple. Simply join your life with mine and let me be your teacher. You'll discover that I am gentle, humble, easy to please, and I'll give you satisfying rest, for I only place upon you what is pleasant and easy to carry. And what many scholars think, on all sides of the coin, think what Jesus was talking about there when he talks about that burden that's too heavy to bear was what the traditions and the ordinances that the Pharisees had placed upon the common folk at that time for appeasing a wrathful and vengeful God. Jesus was saying, this is just too much for you to bear. Take my yoke upon you, and I'll give you rest. And I know I'm not giving a lot of room for you to challenge me on this, right? And I certainly don't want to tell you what to believe, especially if you're in that place where your image of God is really wrathful and he's all about justice. And I do feel that God's all about justice. I really do. But God's ways aren't like ours. And the way that he brings that justice isn't like the way that we bring justice. Peace to God means something entirely different than peace does to humanity. We've been conditioned to believe that peace means the absence of war, not the coming of shalom, where everyone is loving and kind and gentle and there's no threat, there's no fatherlessness, there's no brutality, there's not even a threat of it. That's God's definition of peace. And he'll bring it. I'm convinced that he'll bring it. So I don't want to tell you what to believe. I do want to highlight how Jesus blows the whistle on anxiety and fear, how he blows the whistle on striving. As far as I see, fear and anxiety don't come from God, and the Bible always agrees with me on that. Rarely agrees with me on other things, but that it agrees. So I would like to suggest to you that our view of God in our mind dramatically shapes our view of the world around us. And our view of people tells us something about the way that we view God. If your view of God is making you feel worthless or unlovable, or if your view of God is making you view others, anyone really, as worthless or unlovable, then maybe your view of God needs adjusting. If you've heard me talk about this generous, loving, merciful God and feeling safe and feeling that it's safe to love others in the world and accept love, but because of your life experience, you have no idea how you would do that. Maybe you're in a spot right now where you're experiencing a system of abuse, that there's no way that you can view the world as safe. I would never say to you, I'm sorry that you've been through trauma, but you just need to adjust your view of God. No, I would never say that. I would say that I'm sorry that you have experienced that or that you are. I would say that if you're in an abusive spot right now, come to us at the church and we'll try to find a way to help you, get you in a place where you're safe. If those unsafe days are in your past, but you still bear the wounds and the scars, and really can't even begin to trust, I pray that you would have space and time to heal. I pray that you would find a God that's loving and kind and hurts with you and is gentle and patient. God is all about overcoming, but I know too, at least from my experience on my journey with God, that he is all about sitting there in the mud with us when we feel like we can't get up and can't get out. That parent who's sitting there rubbing the back of their child as they throw up in the toilet. That's the heart of God too. For everyone here, I encourage you to pour your view of God through the filter of Jesus. And I think you'll notice that fear and anxiety and striving oftentimes get caught in that filter. This is a revelation of a man named Isaiah, who was a prophet in the Bible. He lived around 700 BC, and he had these profound realizations about God. And as we conclude our time together, I'm going to invite you to stand, and this will be our benediction for the morning. Quick message, right? 23 minutes. Pew! I always get nervous about going down a spot where I'm talking about the reality in people's lives. But it's the problem is that it continues to happen. Cycles of abuse continue to happen. Me feeling like I've got a God who's going to get me is going to happen. And I feel like if we don't talk about it, then we're not going to be able to step into freedom together. Isaiah says this, "For as the sky soars high above the earth, so the way God works surpasses the way we work. And the way God thinks is beyond the way we think. Just as rain and snow descend from the skies and don't go back until they've watered the earth, doing their work of making things grow and blossom, producing seed for farmers and food for the hungry, so will the words that come out of God's mouth not come back empty-handed." And so the blessing this morning is, may the words of God as they come to you refresh you. May they give you seed for next spring, nourishment for today, and bring about in us a fruitful life so that we can change the world. Amen. Bless you. Thank you all for coming.